Well, as I started this project of these Yellowstone coaches, initially I thought I just had one coach. If you remember back at the beginning of this whole series, I thought I had an undercarriage for an 11 and a body for an 11. Well, it turned out that I had an undercarriage for an 8-passenger and the body for an 11-passenger. So the first thing I did was to rebuild that undercarriage for this 8-passenger. And part of that process was building the wheels. But I never did finish the wheels because I didn't have all the parts. Now this is what was left of the wheels on this undercarriage. This was the hub for this 11-passenger. And inside this hub is a cast iron sleeve that is taper bored and fitted into this. It's a real tight press fit. And then this boxing is what it's called, goes onto the axle, and that's what actually makes the wheel run true if it is installed right. Well, I only had one hub and one boxing, so I was missing 3. So I took the pattern of this hub and I built those wheels, as you are familiar with, but I had to have these boxings custom made. They are a gray cast iron and they absorb grease in that open pore cast surface. And so it is just a open-end bearing system on both sides. So the rule of thumb was about every day or every 20 miles or so, you would take these wheels off and grease them. Now whether they actually did that on these coaches, because on that 11-passenger, when they came in from Oneida to West Yellowstone, that was a 70-mile trip. And they stopped about 35 miles halfway through that trip through the Centennial Valley, and I kind of wonder if they didn't just quickly take and add some grease. I don't know this, but generally the rule of thumb is every day or every 20 miles. So if you think about those pioneers when they were headed west, leaving St. Joe, Missouri, headed for California, Oregon, Washington, wherever it was, the average miles that they would cover would be 12 to 15 miles a day. So about every other day, they would have to prop up the wagon and just slide the wheel out a little bit, add some more grease, slide it back on, and go. It isn't a long process to do that, but it is something that you have to do pretty regularly. So I sent this boxing off maybe 5 months ago back to a machinist that does this, and just recently my other 3 boxings showed up. So now I can do the final install of these boxings into the hubs of my new wheels that'll actually fit that undercarriage. And I have been kind of pushing it toward the back, getting it a little closer to the paint room, because I would like to start the priming process so that they have time to cure. So looking at the back axle here, you can see that we're pretty straight on the bottom of this axle. It has been drawn down to where it has a little belly to it in the center. But when it comes out straight, if you look at this spindle here, it isn't straight, it actually bends down just a little bit. As we look at the right side, you can see the same effect. And if it were possible to see the straight center line on this axle, we'd be able to tell that these spindles are also bent slightly forward, which allows a toe-in on these wheels. And so it's just like cars today. When you do an alignment, you want your wheels to be a little closer in the front than they are in the back, called toe-in. And it helps keep this car running straight down the road and helps alleviate the wander. Well, it's somewhat similar on these wagons. When they have a little bit of toe-in that's helping them run straight, it also puts pressure inward up against the collar on these axles, and that's what's called gather. It's gathering up against the shoulder, and it keeps the pressure away from the nuts. And when these spindles are bent down, that's referred to as swing. So what I'm going to do today in boring and setting the boxings in the wheels doesn't have anything to do with the alignment. All that alignment of gather and swing is set in the axles. Positioning the boxing correctly into the wheel just makes sure that the outside tire, that outside rim, runs straight. That's what we're going to do today. And this is the machine that I use to do that boring of the center boxing. It is a 4-jaw chuck, and I have made this whole assembly here on the end output shaft of this turret lathe. This lathe initially was built by Warner and Swasey in Cleveland, Ohio. Now this is the turret head that used to sit on the bed of the lathe, and I removed it and made a pedestal here for it to sit on. But a turret lathe is designed for mass production, so you would do your boring into your piece, and every time you came back, there's a mechanism inside this framework here that would cause this turret head to rotate 1 notch, and you would have different toolings in all these different places. So it was made for mass production. You do 1 step, come back, and it would turn, and you'd come back and do the next step, whatever you were designing this for, come back and it would turn, and you would come into your next bit. So it allowed you to do multiple steps without having to change all the bits every time. Now I removed all the mechanism inside here, so when I come back it doesn't rotate. It just has one position, and I put a boring bar through that is adjustable, but the head never turns anymore. So this turret head used to mount on the bed here, and then you would have your chuck here that would hold whatever piece you were working on. So this now is just ballast, really. So in order to make this function how I wanted to, I mounted it on a 1/2-inch steel plate that the whole lathe sits on, and I built an individual post that the turret head now sits on, and it pivots here, and it's right underneath the center of the hub that I would be boring. Now this whole thing can swivel side to side, and I do that by operating with my foot just to rotate to get my angles that I'm looking for. So when I initially put this together, I did enough boring to where I knew where my straight center was, so I put a mark here on my heavy plate that houses this whole thing, and then a mark here. So when I line these 2 marks up, then I know I'm straight. And then with this adjustment here, I can change that wherever I want to. So to begin with, I'm going to bore my hole straight. And then I'm going to adjust my taper like so. So the jaws on my chuck are adjustable. I have these spacings on the arms at 2 inches, and then I have spacings on my homemade jaws here at 1 inch. So I can go 2, 4, or I can go 1 or 3 or 5. And so the last wheel that I did on this when I was boring looks like it was about 32 inches. My front wheels are 42 inches, so I need to come out 10 inches totally. So I'm going to adjust each one of these 5 inches. So I'm going to come out, this hole here would be 2, this one would be 4, then I'm going to shift this bolt to this one, which will give me 5. All these are bolted from the back side. So there'd be 2, 4, and I shift this in this position, that'll give me 5. And by the time I do it on both sides, that'll give me my 10 inches. Then these bolts here allow me to do kind of the fine tuning when I actually put the wheel in. Two, 4, and then 5. So now between the two, I actually have 43, but I allow enough room here to take up with these screws here. So I can come in a 1/2 inch on either side, and that'll get me my 42. This helps me to actually do the final adjustment to where I have the hub centered. So I bought this turret lathe back in the early 80s there somewhere. There was a blacksmith shop in Red Lodge that was selling out, and I found this in their sale. You know, I could make use of that, and I had this in mind. But it took me about 10 years before I actually took the step and did all this. Well, I didn't have the lathe capable at that time to turn this big a piece. Now that I have that South Bend gap bed lathe, I could have actually done it on that lathe. But this head was made to screw onto the main shaft of the lathe, and then this was all welded together and then turned to where it was running true, so I could bolt these arms onto it so that each of these arms are actually running true with the lathe. And when I mount the wheel in here and I put the tire up against each of these jaws, that's what actually determines that this wheel runs straight. So when I'm boring the boxing into the center of the hub, I am boring that straight with the tire, not with the hub. And that is confusing to a lot of folks when they see a wheel that maybe that boxing looks like it's a little bit off. They even did this back in the day when it was mass production, because you didn't have that accuracy when you're building on a wooden hub. So sometimes you see these boxings that are a little bit off, but the true test is when the wheel is on the axle, does that tire run true? And that's what this process does. It's boring the hole in the hub and placing that boxing straight in line with the tire, not necessarily the hub. So when I build my hub, I do bore a center hole through it because I mount it onto my wheel stand, but I purposely try to keep that smaller than the small end of the boxing so that I have room to open this up and fit it more exactly to this diameter. So even though these boxings are brand new, they are very seldom exactly the same. I have one here when I put my feeler gauge or my comparator on it and get that measurement. This one here is probably a 1/16 of an inch smaller. The IDs are the same, but the ODs are different. So I always measure when I'm boring the hub to that specific boxing. So I'm going to mount my first front wheel, and this is the side that has a dish to it which faces away from the coach. And that's where I want the tire to be up against each of my jaws. And then I'm a little bit loose here, so I'm just going to come in about equal measurements on my fine tuning bolts here, and we'll get that where it is centered up. And the biggest thing is to make sure it's up against my 4 jaws. So to begin with, to center this up, I'm going to remove my bit. And I have just a piece of round rod here that I'm going to put on here just to reach the edge of my hub and make sure that I am centered. So when I can, I'd like to measure on the hub out here close to the spokes and kind of center it at this point. If there is a little wobble in this hub, this will be the constant, even though the outside might vary a little bit. So I'm going to set that right there to begin with and see how close we are. See, we're a little further away here, then we get a little closer there. I'm going to move this in to where it just touches. So this jaw here needs to come in, and this jaw needs to come out. So I'm going to back this one off just a bit and push this one in just a bit. So I'm just going to continue to do this till I have it centered up. It's actually pretty decent there. I just want to make sure I'm up tight. And I tighten it down. So as so many of my tools are, this is 3-phase also. And this is how straight this wheel should run when it's on the coach. You see a little bit of variation in the hub here, but not in the tire. So now my marks are straight up to where my boring bar is straight. So I'm going to bore a straight hole from the back side to the front, but I'm not going to go all the way through yet. So these boxings are 8.5 inches long. I'm only going to come through about 6.5 to 7 from the back side up, and then I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to turn my wheel around and I'll do the final fit here when I can actually get an accurate measurement. So from my bit back, I'm going to come back about 6.5, and I'll just go that deep is all. So my hubs are 9.25, and you can see the nut is recessed maybe 3/8 of an inch. And then the back end is also recessed maybe 1/2 of an inch. So there's my mark for 6.5. And my adjustment is just moving this bit out piece by piece. So even though I'm boring from the large end in, I'm going to actually measure for the small end, because I want that bore to be straight clear through. Then I'm going to adjust my pedestal and put the taper in. And then when I get to this diameter on the back, just adjusting my taper, leaving my bit alone, then I know I have my angle right. Transfer my outside comparator to my inside. So this is my second pass. I just want to make sure I don't go too far. Be really close right there. That'll work right there. So now I want the OD of the large size of the boxing. Now remembering that it has to come out 1/2 inch, so I'm going to measure 1/2 inch in and kind of get a feel for how many turns on this screw for 1/2 inch, and I'm going to go just that little bit more. That's going to be the measurement out here on the end of the hub. So now, without changing this bit setting at all, I'm going to rotate this whole post over. Just little by little, and that's going to increase my cut until I reach this measurement, which will be the large end of that boxing. See, I haven't changed that bit at all. See, normally I adjust this with my foot, just a bit of a time, and then take the next cut. So when I reach this 6.5 mark on the inside, I'm down to cutting pretty much 0. You have to remember, what you take off in the radius is actually doubling in the diameter, just like all lathe work. And I've done this 4 or 5 times and we're getting pretty close. Maybe one more time. So now I want to recess for the collar, and that wants to be a 1/2 inch. So now I'm going to bring my bit out, and my bits are 1/4 inch. So I'm going to use that as my gauge for my 1/2 inch inset. A little too much bite, huh? So there's a 1/4. And there's my 1/2. Get the outside diameter of the collar. And I want it to fit comfortably loose. Somewhere like so. Just a little bit more. That'll work. Right there. When I turn this around, I want to find a comfortable position. I'm going to loosen these 2 top ones, rotate it so the bottom ones are going to stay the same, put it back in, tighten these up, and it should put this wheel right back in the same position it was initially. So if I leave this as the top, when I turn it around, it should go back the same. Tighten these 2. Should be back in the same position. So we're in the same position as far as the tire to all my jaws here, but because of the taper of these spokes, the inside of these spokes close to the hub want to hit my plate before my tire hits the edge of the jaws. So I'm just going to measure from the edge of my jaw to the edge of the tire and make sure we are all the same. And I have them all right at 3/4 of an inch. So they should run true just like it was before. So now I'm going to go back to center. And I want to bore for the small end of this boxing. One of those times that hub is going to drive you nuts, but we have to remember the tire is running true. So if you can forget the hub band and look at the center hole, which we're right there, that center hole is pretty even. So now I need the diameter of the outside flange of the nut, which is 2.5, and I'd like to go a little more just to give it some room, maybe 2 5/8 to 2 3/4. And there's a strong 2 5/8. Double check small end of our boxing. We're just right there. Check the overall length. Right there at 8.5. Well, this is a little boxing press that my brother-in-law Rick and our father-in-law put together back when Rick and I were still together. I've used it ever since. I've taken apart lots of wheels that have had some kind of a yellow lead-based adhesive on them. I use Titebond. It's the pressure and tightness of a fit that actually holds the boxing in, along with these fins. Now, since this has to be recessed a ½ inch, that gives us our ½ inch recess there. And that brings us out nice and flush on that end. Plenty enough room for the nut. So let's see how straight we are. Not too bad. So that's why usually boring the boxing is the last step after the tire is set. When that tire shrinks, you don't know exactly how all those joints are going to go, how all the spokes are going to give under pressure. So it's really nice to do this as the last step. I know on wagon wheels I do it as the first step just because they're so big, but the spokes are so much heavier, they don't have that kind of flex that these lighter spokes do. Anyway, I got 3 more to go. Appreciate you coming along. Thanks for watching.